Sunday, June 15, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today has been covering the rise of the anti-democratic movement for over 16 years. Her latest book, Money, Lies and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy, was an instant New York Times bestseller. Katherine Stewart, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
It's great to be here.
Now, we're here in unfortunate circumstances, in that so much of what you have been writing about and other scholars and authors who have been warning of what could change in the United States under a second Donald Trump presidency has sadly come true. And I suppose for me, and please, tell me if I'm wrong, but where things changed was involving the U.S. military, sending the National Guard into Los Angeles, followed by the U.S. Marines. That moment when you kind of turn the military upon the people, that is very significant, isn't it, when talking about authoritarianism?
It really is. I mean, creating an emergency to justify an authoritarian reaction is one of the most frequently telegraphed stunts in the whole authoritarian playbook. Trump basically told us over and over again before the election that this is what he wanted to do. He wanted to use the U.S. military against U.S. citizens, and that's exactly what he's doing. I mean, he made sure to, do it in places like downtown Los Angeles to get the optics of fear and chaos that he could then telegraph to a right-wing audience.
And it's simply not true what he's saying, that the whole city is burning. I mean, there was obviously protests about ICE doing these indiscriminate disappearings and deportations to countries that people had never even, been to, and which is entirely legitimate. Most of these protests have been peaceful, but it's actually Trump's military that have upped the ante. So it's almost like he has created the problem specifically for the cameras.
That's true. I mean, look, LA, by what you said, is absolutely correct. There are 102 square miles in Los Angeles, and the protests were really concentrated on a few city blocks. But this declaration of emergency really follows this authoritarian playbook, and it shows how slippery the slope is. It's not even a slope, actually. It's more of like a cliff. Trump will declare anything an emergency. He will declare wokeness, which is anything from the sciences, large swaths of the sciences, to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the fact that there's some undocumented people working in these jobs. And what's very interesting to me is he promised to go after, criminals. And instead, what they're doing is going after people who are actually working jobs and are undocumented, but many of them are doing things like going to their hearings, and they're, coming out of their hearings and getting arrested there and getting detained there. It was very clear that he was going to go after the ordinary, law-abiding, undocumented people, and not just the criminals that he was promising to do.
I mean, part of the problem is there aren't enough criminals for him to arrest to meet his quota. And that's why they've expanded the reach. And it was Stephen Miller, who's very much the architect of a lot of this stuff, Trump's kind of right-hand man for policy, who was furious about the fact that Joe Biden was deporting more people than them. And so kind of then said, well, you just go after any immigrant, effectively. I mean, this is unprecedented, but it's also completely unsurprising when you're dealing with white supremacists. And I mean, Miller, I can quote from his appearance at the Republican National Convention, "America is for Americans and Americans only."
It's true. And it's clear that they're going to keep escalating in blue cities in particular. I mean, they've signaled that they see this as a winning issue. Right-wing propaganda is backing them up, and all the framing is about taking on the criminal elements and being the tough guy. But really what it is punishing blue states. They're not going into places like Nebraska or South Dakota. They're not going into the chicken processing plants or places where red states where you have a lot of undocumented immigrants doing food processing and agriculture work. It's almost like this. They're declaring war on the blue cities because Trump likes to say, "Well, I am the law, and if you are good to me, then I'll be okay with you, and if you go against me, then I will persecute you." I mean, it's really authoritarian.
There's also a threat to arrest Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, for standing in his way and for, when Trump was asked, well, what crime has Gavin Newsom committed? He said, well, for being incompetent. The crux, though, was that he, in order to call the National Guard, you have to request that, or the president has to talk to the governor, and the governor makes the request. But Trump has overridden that and just basically federalized California's National Guard. I mean, that is what has made this so very dangerous and has changed the rules of engagement.
That's true. I mean, the way the system works, to the extent that there are disturbances, is that the states and local authorities get to decide how to handle and use law enforcement first. And then they can decide also to call on the National Guard if they like. State governments have some control over the National Guard as well. If governors need help, they're the ones who call for it. I mean, yes, there was an episode in 1965 where the federal government intervened and nationalized the National Guard. But that was during the civil rights movement, when the state was clearly violating the law to suppress its own people. Nobody has produced any credible evidence on the ground of threats to LA for taking these kinds of steps. And frankly, it was being handled. It could have been handled by local law enforcement. And, given the Trump administration's totally transparent desire to use the military against American people, including American political leaders, it's really silly to pretend there's any legitimate basis for what he's doing. It's simply a power grab. And I also want to point out that this is America. You have the right to peaceably assemble, and you have the right to protest and speak, and you have a right to disagree with what the president says and does. And so for him to go after Newsom in this way is really appalling.
But even immigrants have those rights too. Those rights extend to anybody who is resident in the United States, documented or undocumented. I mean, isn't that the point? And that's kind of what they're hiding, is that these people, they've taken the authority, or Trump's taken his own authority and made that more important than the Constitution.
Well, this is just something he's done over time. I mean, immigration is one way that he's done it, but he's also basically declared everything to be a major crisis. The idea that there's any mention of racial, legacy of racial inequality, the legacy of the reality of economic inequalities. This is a movement that actually lectured us for decades about freedom of speech, and now they've banned words like pollution and climate change and clean energy from government contracts and government agencies. So, the lawlessness is unprecedented. Look, we really are in a place that we've never been before. Yes, there's been presidential overreach in the past. Think about Lincoln during, activating new wartime powers. Think about, other presidents who have suppressed speech at different times, but they could usually claim, some national interest rather than self-interest. And they were, this is just an incredible lawlessness that we've ever seen in our government. And we've never faced this kind of, oh my gosh, the corruption is totally unprecedented. I mean, yeah, we had Harding and his teapot dome scandal, and we had Nixon, of course, attempting to subvert the Department of Justice, but we've never had, a president trade on the power of the presidency with his, like Trump's meme coin schemes, his $400 million Qatari palaces in the sky, his social media company. We've never seen a president give an unelected oligarch unaccountable and unconstitutional power to maraud through the government, slashing and burning agencies at will. This is the most lawless and corrupt presidency in American history. I mean, think about what they're doing. This assault on sciences, which has been such an incredible source of American prosperity and made us the envy of the world. And yet they're just slashing it. It doesn't make any sense, except the way it makes sense is that when you consider this movement wants to create an authoritarian government, truth and rational thinking is inimical to dictatorial power. So the way that they're doing it is by violating the law and then moving the goalposts, moving them again, so they're no longer even visible on the playing field. And
manufacturing crises like time and time again, because when Trump took over in January, the economy was doing much better, coming out the back of COVID still. Inflation was down, jobs numbers were looking good, stock market was thriving, international trade was doing great, free trade and all of those things. Immigration was much better. That they'd really, the Biden administration, they didn't talk about it very much, but they'd made a huge shift, and they weren't separating families, but they really were doing some leftovers from the first Trump administration at the border. So he manufactured an energy crisis. He's manufactured an immigration crisis. He's manufactured a trade crisis.
It's all these lunatic trade wars. I think those wokety wokesters at the Wall Street Journal called it the dumbest trade war in history. But the rhetoric of emergency has really been part of this movement from the beginning. It wasn't just Trump. I mean, think about some of the most influential think tanks behind the MAGA movement, like the Claremont Institute. And think about people who are affiliated with the Claremont Institute who now have jobs in the Trump administration. I'm thinking about Michael Anton and Russell Vogt, who is currently Trump's director of Office of Management and Budget. Both of them had some influence in the making of Project 2025. So, in 2016, Michael Anton described the Trump-Clinton presidential race as the, quote, Flight 93 election. He basically said that if Clinton wins, it's going to be the moral equivalent of a terrorist. Actually, he literally said this. It would be the moral equivalent of a terrorist attack on the United States. And in the face of this emergency, all means of resistance are necessary. The rule of law doesn't, the implication is the rule of law doesn't apply anymore. It's time to rush the cockpit. And the same kind of language showed up in Project 2025 itself. And think about Russell Vogt. He, again, President Office of Director of Office of Management and Budget. But before that, he was running the Center for Renewing America, a think tank. And one of the big asks one of the big goals of this that they stated was, well, two of them. One was to infuse Christian nationalism as much as possible in the administration, but the second one was basically to use the military to quell any kind of domestic protest.
I was going to say, all of this is in the book.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Invoking the Insurrection Act very specifically to mobilize the military to put down those kinds of protests, which is exactly what Trump is doing.
So we were warned about it because we read the document, the 900-page document, in advance. Kamala Harris, during her campaign, was telling us that this was all going to happen. Hillary Clinton told us this was going to happen the last time round. And yet those views were kind of discarded by the media. There is this sense that, I'm quoting a book title here, but, it couldn't happen here. This American exceptionalism, the idea that America could never fall to an authoritarian dictatorship because it's America.
I know.
You must think about that a lot.
I do. I'm not going to name any names, but I was reassured by various editors that, we're not going to go into authoritarianism. That's not going to happen here. Look, I think, the capitulation of CBS, ABC, and others to intimidation is disgrace. And you're seeing some of that kind of capitulation happening even now, and it's really sad. But that said, I don't think the coverage in the traditional media is the core of the information problem that we're facing. I think the core really is, and by the way, there's still some terrific reporting in mainstream media. Let's just not, there's fantastic journalists still working in, the largest outlets that we have. And I think the real problem is that we have this massive disinformation and propaganda operation masquerading as media, and that huge sectors of the population no longer consume mainstream media, but really have allowed themselves to be drawn into these fact-free disinformation spheres, and they're being fed manipulative and partial streams of information through social media.
The visuals of cars on fire, the visuals of a Mexican flag being waved in front of a car on fire. This is the stuff that Trump really was hoping for.
He knew he was going to get it. That's why he went to downtown LA.
Yeah.
He didn't go to the agricultural fields of Central Valley.
Yeah.
And, there he could have, by the way, found lots and lots of undocumented immigrants working in processing plants, working in the fields. There would have been few, if any, protests at all because it's sort of far away from a city center. But he went to downtown LA.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking about a few city blocks out of a 502 square mile city. The city is not burning. And that kind of, law breaking can always be handled by, locally, and as has happened many, many times before. And there was absolutely no reason to call in,
But there is an attitude in the US regarding protest and criminal damage that we don't really have in Europe, because the punishment for criminal damage in Europe doesn't even come close to how it is in the US. So people are kind of scared to protest, I guess, here, because they then will spend the rest of their lives, either in the, on a probation in the court system with a criminal record, whereas in France, it's like, it's just another car on fire, or even a police car. There is a marked difference between the freedom to protest in America and elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the point we really need to emphasize here is that, they've been planning this from the very beginning. They said, let's send in raids, let's make sure they spark a backlash, and then let's send in the military. So the fact of the matter is that, they knew exactly what they were doing by going to this particular place. They knew they were going to spark something unmanageable, just in the short term, although it would have been manageable in the longer term. But, the majority of people who were protesting peaceably. They may have, focused on those maybe one or two Waymos that were on fire on, ABC 7, but I saw videos of people dancing and
blowing bubbles.
Families. I know, blowing bubbles and, doing the things that Americans have a right to do because we have the right to public assembly in our First Amendment. I mean, these are folks who take the Second Amendment really, really seriously. So you'd think that they would take the First Amendment really seriously, but they really want to spark a backlash against any kind of protest that they don't like. I mean, the irony, the sort of contrast between the way they're dealing with, a few city blocks in LA and, there's some people, whatever. And then the January 6th insurrection, which was a whole other order.
Right.
It was absolutely disgraceful, attack on our Capitol, an attack on our constitutional processes, an attack on the transfer of power. But we also have to remember that Trump set this up and the MAGA movement set this up. They spread disinformation about the 2020 election long before January 6th. So that by the time it happened, a lot of those people who, violently assaulted police officers, did terrible things in the Capitol, threatened to murder Mike Pence, to execute Mike Pence and other lawmakers. They were persuaded by the voices that they trusted the most.
Well, they thought they were doing the right thing. They were told that they were taking their country back. They were told that they had been that the election had been stolen by Joe Biden. And so, yeah, that visual of breaking into the chamber and, putting your feet up on the desk in Nancy Pelosi's office, it was very explicit. But all of those people now have been pardoned. Those people have been sent back into the community, even those who are violent towards police officers.
Well, this is what autocrats do. They say, if you break the law, but you're on my side, it's really okay. You won't suffer any consequences at all. He also pardoned a number of anti-abortion protesters who physically, broke the law, physically blocked clinics, did things that actually ended up hurting people, physically causing physical injury. And he pardoned them. And basically he's saying, if you're on my side, wink, nod, you can do what you like. And, get yourself organized because maybe I'll need you again. It's really, really disgraceful.
I often think about how much Trump, who doesn't read, as far as I know, is borrowing from dictators of history, or whether the dictatorial behavior is in his DNA. It's just built in. And so we are the ones who are projecting the playbook, but ultimately he's just another evil nutjob. I mean, we'd heard, I think, from his ex-wife or something that he kept a copy of Mein Kampf next to the bed.
I know.
And listened to Hitler's speeches. But could it be the case that he genuinely is like, okay, what did Hitler do? Right, I want to do that next. I mean, am I overthinking this?
We can't know what other people do in their, spare time. We don't have those crystal balls. But he's following a playbook that a lot of autocrats have used. This sort of identity politics. You're one of us or you're one of them. You're one of the pure versus the impure. And a lot of the way I do my research for the books I've written on the anti-democratic movement is I spend a lot of time in those sort of far-right spaces, and I've seen Trump speak on a number of occasions. At every single speech, he says, the greatest threat to our country is not our foreign adversaries, as dangerous as they may be. The greatest threat we face is the enemy from within, and he's talking about anybody who's not on board with his agenda, including rhinos, at some of those gatherings. I've seen people walk around with T-shirts that say I'm going rhino hunting with pictures of firearms. So anybody who's not on board with his agenda is one of them, the sort of, and often those folks are called demonic or satanic or under the thumb of Satan.
Well, look how quickly they turned on Mike Pence. I mean, that only took 20 minutes. I know. Sanctimonious Mike Pence, it didn't do him any good, did it? Right.
And then, so there's identity politics. Then, of course, there's a sort of sense that we're facing this terrible emergency. The rules don't apply anymore. Oh, there's a persecution narrative. We are the most persecuted group in society. They are persecuting us, the righteous. And then there's a sense of emergency. We're facing this apocalypse. If we don't suspend the rules, we're going to go again under the thumb of Satan, the Illuminati. It's going to be terrible. And then that clears the way for an authoritarian reaction. A leader who says, I alone can fix it. I see the problem. I'm the only person who can fix it. And I'm going to break the rules and crack heads. And his followers are okay with that because he's promising to crack the heads of the people they've been told are their enemies. And in this case, that's fellow Americans. And it's really dangerous. We've seen this before. We've seen this in, leaders like Vladimir Putin in Russia. We've seen this, I don't want to invoke Godwin's law and talk about the Nazis too much, but we can talk about them a little bit, right?
Well, because the parallels are there.
The parallels are there.
I get the feeling that Viktor Orban was responsible for quite a lot of this because they'd built up a bit of a connection and a friendship. If you look to Hungary right now, you can see the war on the press and freedoms and rights. And, it is a very similar, it's probably the newest of the nations to fall to fascism. And Trump talked about Viktor Orban like he was a celebrity. Like
he's his buddy. It's true. I mean, Hitler rose to power. Remember the 1933, the Reichstag fire?
Yeah.
It was an emergency. Hitler declared this to be a terrible emergency, and that was a justification for this enormous crackdown. But, it goes even further back. Think about Napoleon. I think it was 1799. He declared that France was under this terrible emergency, and that's how he rode to power. And he said, I'm going to try and remember this quote. I don't have it in front of me. Something along the lines of, he who saves the country can break no law, meaning, or he is the law.
Yes.
If you're saving the country from an apocalypse, you are the law. And that's what Trump is trying to do. He's trying to be the law himself. He wants to, it's the same thing with the Treasury. I mean, talking about how he's going to do this at blue states. He's already punishing blue states. He's declining to send FEMA money. He's declining to send them services that they've paid into and deserve. He's indicated that he's going to privilege red states in a number of ways financially. And it's like saying, I am the Treasury. I control the Treasury. It's the same thing with, remember that Qatari palace in the sky? He said, oh, well, it's coming to me, so it's coming to America. It's like, no, it's not. It's coming to
It's very interesting, isn't it? Blurring the line between the executive and the country itself, and where patriotism lies. If you don't bow down and kiss the ring, then you're not a patriot. I mean, this is in itself, it's the kind of egomania meets the malignant narcissism meets the dictator.
It's very North Korean.
The worst qualities for a leader of the free world.
I know. It's true. It's really true.
We have to take a quick break, Katherine, but I want to come back and talk more on this, especially about Gavin Newsom. And I also want to talk about the new travel ban, which Trump announced a week or so ago. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. If you've ever searched your own name or address in Google, it's shocking to find how many results have your personal information. And it's not by chance. Data brokers and people search sites collect your personal information, your name, address, phone number, financial information, income, and hundreds of other records. They sell and share it publicly without your consent. But Incogni is here to put an end to that. It hunts down these unethical sites and gets your information removed from the places that expose your private data. You don't have to email anyone, fill out any forms, or jump through hoops. They handle the entire process for you. Incogni is also continuously monitoring to see if your data is put back onto these databases, requesting repeated removals. This way, keeping them off forever, so you get way less spam calls, spam emails, and get more peace of mind. And best of all, you can cancel any time, and they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can get it completely risk-free. Right now, you can get 60% off an annual plan by going to incogni.com and use code WEEKEND. That's incogni.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND at checkout. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Get 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND at checkout. There's a lot happening these days. It can feel especially stressful or hopeless when things are outside of our control. But Calm can help you restore your sense of balance amidst outside chaos. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Everyone faces challenges in their daily lives, and mental health isn't about a cookie-cutter approach. That's why Calm offers a wide range of content and programs to help you navigate the ups and downs of life, including meditation, sleep stories, sleep meditation, calming music, grounding exercises, and expert-led talks to help you handle grief, improve self-esteem, care for relationships, and much more. Calm puts the tools that you need in your pocket and helps you dedicate a few minutes each day to live a happier, healthier life. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. For listeners to this show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/weekend. Go to calm.com/weekend for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/weekend. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on the Weekend Show with Katherine Stewart. I'm Anthony Davis. Gavin Newsom has stepped up in the last week or so as Donald Trump has asserted his authority and basically undermining the role of the governor. Newsom declared democracy is under assault in a blistering evening address in which he accused Donald Trump of pulling a military dragnet across Los Angeles. And as the protests continued over the immigration raids and the federal deployment of military forces to the state, Newsom said that Trump's immigration crackdown had gone well beyond arresting criminals, and that dishwashers, gardeners, day laborers, and seamstresses were among those being detained. The problem is now that people are scared, and that fear is infectious in a way. And we've seen a drop of people entering the United States. People don't want to be arrested and sent to a El Salvadorian gulag. They don't want to have their phones confiscated and their social media questioned. And this is going to have a huge effect, not just for people living in Los Angeles, but right across the nation. And there doesn't seem to be, apart from Gavin Newsom, using this language to describe authoritarianism so explicitly. We're not really hearing that from any other leaders, are we?
Well, we're hearing it from some Democratic leaders, but Newsom is a governor who's really articulating this with clarity and precision in a way that I think a lot of Americans can hear it. When you talk about the travel ban, it's really true. A lot of conferences, which have been a huge source of economic, generator of economic growth and stability, travel in so many places. Tourists just don't want to come here. Tourists from Europe, tourists from the UK, tourists from Canada. There's been a drop in tourism, and this is affecting a lot of businesses all across the country.
It's amazing considering that, everybody wanted to come to America just a few weeks ago. And yet Trump has been able to kind of tarnish the history and the heritage and put any future for this nation on hold whilst he effectively goes crazy. I mean, that is what it is. There is a level of insanity attached to this where it feels like there is no understanding of the knock-on effect on tourism or any of the associated businesses. I mean, even his buddies are going to lose money in the long run if people are not traveling to the United States. Do you think he even has considered that this rhetoric about immigration and these emergencies that he has invented is going to affect the GDP, going to affect tourism, going to affect revenue and tax revenue? Do you think he even knows, or does he just not care?
Well, it's hard to know what's in his head. But one thing is clear, is I think his fortune is just about doubled since he's been in office,
right,
because he is trading on the power of the presidency. He is rewarding his cronies with pieces of the national treasury. This is what a lot of the war on public education is really about. A lot of his cronies want to, run charter networks. A lot of sort of religious right interests are very interested in getting direct taxpayer funding for their religious schools. But it goes well beyond that. I mean, think about, the idea of opening up public lands. Who's going to get those contracts? Who is benefiting? Somebody's benefiting every single day when they detain somebody and put them in a substandard ICE facility, and it's probably a Trump crony, people who've donated to his, various, interests, and then in reward got some kind of contract. So I think that, we have to keep in mind that this is, cronyist kleptocracy. It's not just, authoritarianism. I mean, I think, a lot of times look at sort of the religious right angle of it. And I've done that in all of my books as well. And a lot of people talk about, well, does he really want to establish a theocracy? And I would say, if you look at leaders like, Orban, or if you look at leaders like Putin, or leaders in Iran, or look at Erdogan in Turkey, they're binding themselves really tightly to these sort of ultra-conservative religious figures in their own countries to consolidate authoritarian power, to do that sort of friend-enemy distinction. You're either with us or you're against us. Right. But those countries are better described as cronyistic kleptocracies, cronyistic, kleptocratic, authoritarian countries with theocratic features. They're not really pure theocracies. So that,
you can't argue with God, can you, I suppose? No, and that's the argument that they make.
People up and saying you're with me or you're against me. You're on board or you're not. You're voting for the biblical candidate. I mean, think about it.
I know. the irony. But people say that Trump is doing God's work.
I know.
They honestly believe that he is the chosen one, that this is, he has some kind of divine connection.
This is where the disinformation comes in. I spent time at these Reawaken America tours. You know what they are. They're these traveling MAGA roadshows. They take place in mega churches around the country. Right. They're organized by people like Mike Flynn, and one of the Trump kids usually shows up to speak. So they're very tightly tied into who Trump is. And, they're always talking about him as sent by God and saved by God. And there's a lot of art in those spaces with, a picture of Trump with a young Arnold Schwarzenegger's body, and then Jesus on one shoulder and an eagle on the other. I mean, they really have made it so that voting, they've sort of seen him as like a Cyrus figure, like an imperfect ruler, an imperfect person that God chose to enact his will. So they say, well, he's vulgar, but, he's really saving us from the great Satan of the woke, whatever that means. And so voting becomes almost like a religious act,
I sometimes think, are we surprised? Should we be surprised and shocked? And the other part of me is like, well, no. I mean, anybody who has been paying attention over the last decade has seen how this has happened. Obviously, it goes much further back than that, but in terms of Trump's connection to this, he as I see it, was a useful idiot, like a Trojan horse for the far right. And whereas traditional leaders might have said, well, the far right is too much for me, is too extreme, it's too fringe, his insecurity was such that he needed everybody. He's like, bring them all. I don't care who they are as long as they're voting for me, which strategically is rather clever. But now we're left with the embers of that, which is that the far right has moved into the White House. And it very much is the fringe that is now running the show. And there is no sense of normality. The pendulum will never swing back to a safe space with these people in charge.
It's true. I think the biggest institutional failure is a failure of the Republican Party. I mean, the Republican Party stopped Nixon. They saw what he was doing, his criminality, and they said, no, you're out. That party is gone. I mean, there's no trace of honor or respect for the law or the Constitution among congressional Republicans. They could stop this now, and they refuse to do so. And by the way, some of them have sort of said things like, oh, we're frightened. We're being threatened. You know what? A lot of people are being threatened. Do your job. This is what you're there to do.
The elected representative is not really representing anybody. They're just protecting themselves.
I know.
And I mean, I find it interesting that democracy doesn't even really extend to Republican lawmakers giving interviews. You know, they don't even give that much of themselves. You know, that's why they have to be like doorstepped in the corridors of Congress.
I know.
Just to try and get a few words out of them. Whereas, as I understand it, certainly where I'm from, to talk to the media is very much a part of the democratic process. And yet all that stuff seems to have gone. And so this idea that Republicans, though, are frightened, I mean, this is very real for them. They have had threats, not from Democrats, they've had threats from the regime.
I agree, but I'm sure they have. A lot of people have been threatened. Judges have been threatened. Ordinary Americans have been threatened. Journalists have been threatened, you know. But now is really the time for moral courage. I mean, think about when they lost in 2020. They didn't get under the covers and suck their thumbs. They got out there and they decided to fight. Now, they did things we would never want to do. They spread lies and disinformation. They inspired and perhaps organized political violence. You'd never want to do that. But they also spoke out. They spoke to their base. They turned out their base. They went after low propensity voters. They didn't give up. And we have to remember that the country didn't go MAGA. What happened was, there was, if you look at the number of eligible voters, about the same percentage voted for Trump. If, the number of eligible voters increased, same percentage more or less voted for Trump as in 2020, but there was diminished enthusiasm for voting on the Democratic side of the aisle. But, Trump, if you look at the percentages by which presidents win elections, Trump won by a small percentage. He won by a smaller percentage in 2024 than Joe Biden won in 2020. And so I'm hoping that as all of these sort of the chaos and the cuts, as, prices rise because of these needless trade wars, as people recognize that we've abandoned our dearest allies and Trump is allying with like a murderous dictator, as, the sort of cuts start to really hit people as people lose their Social Security and their Medicare and their health care, as a scientific apparatus, like the destruction of our scientific and health apparatus starts to actually have real consequences. I'm hoping that people can really, there's a real opportunity here, I think, for folks to say, here are the people who did this to you. They're not making your life better. And here are some people who are fighting for you.
What would you say to the MAGA Republicans who see the landscape now and they're like, I didn't vote for this? They voted for, anti-woke maybe, or they voted for the immigration, or they voted because of the economy. And instead they got the total deconstruction of the administrative state and annihilation of the institutions and the pillars that make America great.
I understand. Look, one has to meet people where they are. Welcome.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. We need a big tent. Those of us who support democracy and its institutions need to have a big tent. I'm going to paraphrase a former president who said the person who agrees with you 80% of the time is your 80% friend, not your 20% enemy. And we're not all going to get everything we want. We probably shouldn't get everything we want, because it's a big, noisy, very diverse country. But if we can agree on more than we disagree on, then I think we can work together.
Let's talk for a second about the travel ban. I was interested when Tehran denounced the travel ban on Iranians and citizens of 11 other mostly Middle Eastern and African countries, saying it was a sign of a racist mentality. When Iran is complaining, then that there's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the fact, we can look at what they're doing and where they're banning people from, and it's just racist,
Yes.
just absolutely racist.
Yes. The countries were black and brown population countries, invariably Middle Eastern countries, but omitted was Egypt, which is the instigation for this travel ban, we were told, was because of the terrorist attack by an Egyptian national who'd overstayed his visa, but Egypt was not included in this.
Did they give Trump a palace in the sky?
Well, I was going to say, I was about to come on to Qatar and the UAE and Dubai and places that
Right.
Trump is currently doing business with, whose human rights records are appalling. And I mean, Saudi Arabia, for example, I mean, the 9/11 bombers were Saudi nationals, and yet they're not on the list.
Yeah, well, it's pay to play. It's the pay to play presidency, and it's not in the national interest. It's only in Trump's self-interest. And this is absolutely unprecedented on this scale.
It's basically a ban. There's not even any room for negotiation. It's if your face doesn't fit, you're not coming in. And this is hugely problematic for not just people that were planning on visiting or were coming to Harvard, coming to universities, coming to study, but people who have relatives here, people who have already settled here, who suddenly won't feel welcome if they're from Eritrea or something. I mean, this is a huge cultural problem. Racism, though, is really all this is about. I mean, there isn't really anything else. There's no evidence to suggest that any of these people are any more dangerous on a national security front than Americans themselves.
That's really true. And it reminds me of something that I've been following a bit. One of Barron Trump's closest friends is a young boy who there was a YouTuber who was in the country without, I think he was undocumented, but he's like one of the biggest, no, it's a TikToker, one of the biggest TikTokers around. And this young boy, went after him and said he's undocumented and got him to self-deport. So I was like, what kind of family is this young boy from, where he is so petty that he would go after one of the most popular TikTokers who was in the country and probably doing interesting things? And why would he do that? So I looked up his mother, and his mother saw the play Wicked on Broadway, and she got really upset that Ariana Grande had a role, Ariana Grande, the singer, and she said, she's obviously Hispanic, as though there's something wrong with being Hispanic. Now, Ariana Grande happens to be Italian American, but what kind of woman goes to Wicked and gets upset because Ariana Grande, a supposed Hispanic, has a major role? And I just think that there's so much, the racism is so deep and so reflexive, and I think that we need to face it and call it out for what it is.
And again, this is all baked into Project 2025, the segregation, the white people good, black people, brown people bad. But it also connects to this great replacement theory that a lot of these Trump people subscribe to. And I'm not just talking about Trump voters, I'm about Trump administration people, this fear that the white man is losing in numbers to people of color, and that something has to be done about that to kind of maintain authority.
When they talk about, there's that pronatalist movement now, they're trying to target the sort of MAGA young people to just have lots of kids. And they're really, like, implicitly, they want young white people to be having babies. It's really, when you look at some of the social media accounts or writings of some of the folks who are very active in the pronatalist movement, you dig a little deeper, and there's quite a lot of overt racism in some of their work.
And then some of them don't even realize they're being racist. I mean, it is so baked into their upbringing and to their parents and their childhood and stuff that I really do feel that there is just a mindset that is, it's not exclusive to the United States, but it's very present here.
It's the old Jim Crow mentality in models.
Yeah. It's very, very sad, especially when you know your history and you know about America being built by immigrants. I mean, even the White House was built by slaves. I mean, this is something that is so baked in to the construction of this nation, and yet the deconstruction is all they seem to care for right now.
That's true. I mean, Trump himself is a child of immigrants. His wife is an immigrant. I don't know what kind of visa she came in on.
Yes. It was an Einstein visa, I think, wasn't it? Which is ironic.
Yeah.
Obviously, people who are watching us have this conversation will be feeling like, yes, but what can we do about it? You know, why does it sound so defeatist? Why does it sound like that there are no options if Trump controls the House, the Senate, the executive, pretty much the judiciary, certainly the Supreme Court has blanket immunity, now is turning the military into a kind of partisan organization as well. That what hope do Democrats really ever have of taking back either House or even just having any kind of sway? I'm going to prevent you from answering that question because we have to take another break, but we're going to come back and deal with exactly that next here on The Weekend Show. When the world eventually goes downhill, and let's be honest, it's not looking great right now, you know what the first thing I'm going to make sure I have with me? Not my friends or family, it's my cat, Shuby, and his favourite cat food, Smalls. This podcast is sponsored by Smalls, and if you're a listener to the show, you'll know that my cat, Shuby, cannot live without Smalls. To get 35% off plus additional 50% off your first order, head to smalls.com and use our promo code WEEKEND for a limited time only. Smalls cat food is protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients you'll find in your fridge, and it's delivered right to your door. That's why Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. Still not a believer in Smalls? Forbes ranked Smalls the best overall cat food, while BuzzFeed said, "My cat went completely ballistic for this stuff." Smalls also has an amazing bunch of treats and snacks to add to your order. Shuby particularly loves the smooth fish kibbles. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. That's a big deal. So what are you waiting for? Give your cat the food they deserve. For a limited time only, because you're a Weekend Show listener, you can get 35% off Smalls plus an additional 50% off your first order by using my code WEEKEND. That's an additional 50% off when you head to smalls.com and use promo code WEEKEND. Again, that's promo code WEEKEND for an additional 50% off your first order plus free shipping at smalls.com. You know how they say that we spend a third of our lives in bed? Well, that really hit me because what we're sleeping on matters. And that's why I switched to an avocado mattress. Avocado is all about better for you, better for the planet. Their mattresses are handcrafted using certified organic latex, cotton and wool. No toxic chemicals, no synthetic junk, just clean, breathable materials that help me sleep cooler and deeper, especially with summer heat coming. I went with the Avocado Green mattress, their bestseller, and I get why. It's insanely comfortable, supportive, and I love knowing it's sustainably made. Plus, they've got options from ultra-luxurious to radically affordable, so you can find the perfect fit. Take their mattress quiz. It's super helpful. And with a 1-year sleep trial, easy financing, and stores you can try them in, there's really no reason not to dream of better. Because honestly, organic really does sleep better. Shop now at avocadomattress.com and save up to $200 on certified organic mattresses. Dream of better. Gas prices up, rent, groceries. Don't get me started. It feels like everything costs more these days, except credit building with Kickoff. At a time when money's tighter than ever, Kickoff gives you an affordable way to build real credit without the stress of expensive credit card debt. No credit check, no interest, just $5 a month. And it can really help move your score up fast. Users with credit under 600 grew an average of 84 points in their first year with on-time payments. With transparent, affordable plans starting at just $5 a month with no hidden fees and zero interest, Kickoff helps you score big when it comes to credit. It's simple. You make on-time payments, credit bureaus see good behavior, and your credit can grow fast. Start building credit immediately for only $1 for your first month. AutoPay helps you build credit while you sleep and never worry about missing a payment. Sign up in minutes from your phone, no credit check, and cancel anytime. With over 1 million users and hundreds of thousands of positive reviews, there's a reason why Kickoff is the #1 credit builder on the App Store. Start building credit with Kickoff today, and you can get your first month for as little as $1. That's 80% off the normal price when you go to getkickoff.com/weekendshow today. That's Kickoff without the C. Get KIKOFF.com/weekendshow. Must sign up via getkickoff.com/weekendshow to activate offer. Offer applies to new Kickoff customers for the first month only, subject to approval. Offer subject to change. Average first-year credit score impact of plus 84 points, Vantage score 3.0, between Jan 2023 and Jan 2024 for Kickoff credit account users who started with a score below 600, who paid on time, who had no delinquencies or collections added to their credit profile during the period. Late payments may negatively impact your credit score. Individual results may vary. Katherine Stewart is our guest here on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. So we've seen America fall to fascism. It has fallen as I see it. There's a lot of people who will never acknowledge that or admit that, but as it stands, we are looking with Trump's military parade, with the use of language, Gavin Newsom in California stepping up and standing up to authoritarianism and using those words. We've seen a power vacuum on the side of the Democrats. We don't really have the kind of leadership that would be helpful in this time. We're not in an election cycle, so there is no kind of clear Democratic leader as a potential presidential candidate who is taking this on. I mean, maybe Newsom is going to take that by default at this rate, but what can people do? Because we talked a little about the fear of protest because of the criminal damage and being criminalized because you're just out there and caught in the crossfire. But how do you see this playing out? Is there any chance of there being a legitimate election ever again where Democrats can regain some authority?
Absolutely. Look, we have elections in less than, I think it's a year and 7 months. 17 months. I'm so sorry. We have elections in 17 months. And this is the time to really start acting. I mean, there's so much we can do as individuals, and there's so much more that we can do when we join together with others. So first, there's absolutely no substitute for the power of the vote. And we all have a sort of sphere of influence, people in our world, whether it's our faith communities or our book clubs or any other sort of gathering where we can start speaking to our friends and families and don't just, talk about voting, hold people to account to vote, make it fun, make it be a group activity, find people in your neighborhood who might need help getting to the polling station, or maybe somebody who needs babysitting so they can actually get there. So I think, there's absolutely no substitute for voting. Second of all, I'm seeing a lot of positive moves when it comes to sort of organization building and infrastructure building. This is something that was sorely neglected for a really long time on the sort of, I would say, pro-democracy side. The anti-democratic movement and the religious right has spent decades building up its organizational infrastructure, its policy groups, and people are not just these groups aren't just acting individually; they're acting in sort of in tandem with others. And I'm starting to see that kind of infrastructure building and coordination happen on the pro-democracy side. I think it's really important, again, to have a big tent and to understand we're all going to have to give a little bit. But if we can agree on some democratic principles and the legitimacy of democratic institutions, the principles of fairness and equality and justice, then we can work together. And finally, I think local activism is really important. Get involved. I think when we step back and think, it's so boring to go to school board meetings, let somebody else do it. If we step back, who shows up? The Moms for Liberty.
Right.
they're the ones who raise hell and claim the schools are full of pornography and, teaching CRT, none of which is true. So it's really important to be aware of what's happening in your local school district and your town hall and your, state governance if you're able to do that. And finally, there are a lot of organizations out there that really support democracy. There's so many avenues for engagement. So find an organization that chimes with your values and your interests, or where you think you can contribute your skill set or resources if you have them, and get involved. And, when you're involved in a democracy building movement, there's no better place to be. You meet some of the most wonderful people, and you sleep well at night because you're doing what you can.
If I play devil's advocate just for a moment, and I'm not trying to extinguish the fire, but can you imagine Donald Trump leaving the White House willingly? I mean, can you imagine if the Democrats did have a landslide victory, or even just a gentle victory, and him kind of make the phone call to congratulate the Democratic candidate, take down all of those horrific golden additions that he's made to the Oval Office, and just leave, in a very orderly fashion? Because I just don't see him ever leaving that place. They'll have to carry him out in a box.
Yeah. I mean, I left my crystal ball in the other room, unfortunately, so I don't.
But there is a precedent here. I mean, he didn't want to leave last time.
But listen, it's possible that he will have done so much damage to the economy, to our, just created so much chaos in the country, that it won't just be sort of Democrats that, are eager to see him go. It will be other folks as well.
And I guess that's the thing with politics, because we can't predict, and things happen that we were never expecting. Sometimes there really are some curveballs that present themselves because of situations that are created by Trump or whoever, and it could be things from, ranging from natural disasters to who knows what, but I recognize that we are not always in control of our destiny. But when it comes to the vote, and when it comes to a legitimate election, Trump has obviously been sowing disinformation about the safety and security of elections. And I'm sure that Dominion voting systems would have something to say about that. But in reality, we are hearing from Elon Musk, well, if it wasn't for me, Trump would never have won the election. This type of language doesn't help matters, does it? And it's almost as if they do feel like they have some kind of ownership over elections, and certainly the Electoral College, the system with which we use to elect presidents. Does that not worry you?
Oh, it certainly does. I mean, the big news between the sort of Trump-Musk thing wasn't that two billionaire lunatics got into a mud fight. The big news is that, unfortunately, you have matters of major national policy that are being determined by the state of a relationship between these two guys. So, I think it's deeply concerning. We really are facing a crisis. I think there's a crisis in the courts. I think there was a crisis as soon as they declared that anything that the Supreme Court declared that anything that ruled that anything Trump does as part of his office is can't be prosecuted. It's it's kind of mad. So I think we have a lot of issues that have to be addressed, but we need to get enough political power back in order to begin to address them.
And the courts obviously is really all that's left in terms of the a branch that is holding together when all others seem to have failed.
Yeah, I mean, he is losing case after case. Right. The courts are really slow rolling this.
Yes.
And because pro-democracy forces have the Constitution and the law on their side. Mm-hmm. But one wonders how long they can sort of hold on. I mean, an election has to be won in order for that to really, for that to hold.
And threats to judges like Hannah Dugan, for example, who I think he was trying to make an example of, where she was trying to, protect a migrant who was having a hearing and prevented ICE from arresting him immediately. I mean, this again is it's Trump laying out his authoritarian stall for people and saying, this is the line, you must respect my authority. But it's hard for judges, isn't it? Because, they're people at the end of the day too, with lives and with families, and we are at the mercy of them. It's not like this is a computer deciding the fate of people.
It's true. I think what we're learning is that the American constitutional system really only works properly when parties, political leaders have respect for the norms and institutions of democracy. It's really not designed to sustain an attack from within. One can't know if Trump is a Russian asset or not, but he may as well be. I mean, he's destroying our sources of our economic prosperity. He's divided our country as never before. He's abandoned our international allies and, made virtual love to a murderous dictator. He's, these ridiculous trade wars. I mean, what is this? We're going to take Canada? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Well, falling out with our allies and repositioning the nation, I suppose a good place to end really is, metaphorically, it could be the end, because you're basically asking America to say goodbye to European allies and say hello to the former Soviet Union, to get into bed with the Kremlin.
And the Kremlin has always wanted America to be weak. You can just see him sort of rubbing his hands over all of this, sort of with happiness and anticipation. You could see Chinese leadership doing the same. Yes. Because power hates a vacuum. I mean, by abandoning our soft power, guess who's going to step in? I mean, it's other foreign major powers that are going to take up that soft power and are eager to take up hard power as well and want economic dominance as well. So one can hope that enough Americans will be able to see the bigger picture and look past some of the silly culture wars that the right wants to preoccupy us with. Sometimes I think of those issues, as like shiny baubles or like a laser pointer cat toy. The cat toy that shines a little red light on the ground and the cat jumps at it.
Yeah. Look over here.
That's why they talk nonstop about, transgender women playing on women's sports teams. Now, whatever you or I might think about that issue, it's a massive distraction from like the major issues that are affecting our country. And it's not that those issues don't deserve some attention, perhaps from sports authorities or, doctors who specialize in hormones and things like that, but they're not issues that matter. They're not the bread and butter issues that matter to everyday Americans. And so hopefully more Americans will be able to see beyond the sort of stuff that they're being distracted by and focus on the bigger picture.
Because some Americans have already started to talk about Putin as if he is the goodie rather than the baddie, and that Volodymyr Zelensky is the baddie. And this is just Russian propaganda. I mean, this is the way that Putin presents the war in Ukraine to the Russian people, is that they are liberating Ukraine because Zelensky is a Nazi. But we're starting to hear similar things from Tulsi Gabbard, for example, who has we've always questioned whether she's compromised.
She's been doing this, right? Yeah, I know. Tulsi Gabbard and others. I mean, we're really facing an information war. Yeah.
I mean, she put out a video saying that the threat of nuclear war. Like, she showed a 2-minute video on her official channel.
Oh gosh.
Saying that the political elites had bunkers that would protect them from a nuclear war and with Russia. And I mean, it was stuff straight out of Putin's playbook. And this is now being delivered on official US government channels. Yeah. You couldn't make this stuff up even if you tried. And yet this is our shared reality now.
I know you want to sort of confront some of those Republicans who've been very, strong about, national security, and they use that as their sort of justification for voting Republican for many years. Say, well, we're the party of, national defense and
law and order.
Yeah. And it's like, one will hope that some of the reality will actually break through. But, this is a movement, the Trump, the anti-democratic movement long preceded Trump.
Yes.
And it will unfortunately outlast him. But there have been connections with sort of Russian interests among folks within that movement for many years, going back to even people like Paul Weyrich, who started making a lot of trips to the former Soviet Union and finding like-minded folks to sort of have conversations with. And then you have organizations like the International Organization of the Family, which brings in representatives of the American right with also representatives of the Duma in conversation or and other sort of reactionary representatives in other countries. I've been to one of their gatherings. It was called the World Congress of Family. It took place in Verona, Italy. And I remember one of the speakers, he said, "We are as global as globalism itself." And then he said, this is a fellow who's like the former lead, he was a former politician in Moldova, very Russia allied. And he said, "Make liberal politicians fear you." So they basically see themselves as part of a pro-family shared agenda, but it's really about destroying liberalism and liberal democracy.
And all of these roads seem to lead to the Kremlin via the oligarchs. I mean, oligarch was not a word that we really used in the US until a couple of years ago, when we began to see that these connections between these kind of tech billionaires and Russian investment was all kind of connected. And so there is a theory that it is the tech billionaires and the broligarchs, as they're called, who actually are the ones controlling this narrative, who are the puppet masters, and who have a different vision for the world, where borders are actually controlled, or the borders are disappeared, and instead it's the tech that controls nations.
I think a lot of them have what one would call founders syndrome. They think that they are just so much smarter than everybody else, and so they have ideas about how the world should be run, and it's very nihilistic in a way. They're, I think, more defined by what they want to destroy than what they want to create. Yes. They sort of know who to hate. They're sort of united in hating the woke, or the liberals, etc. But when they talk about what they want to create, it's always some kind of fantasy of a world that could never really exist the way they think it could. And I think that a lot of them, it's only a sector, of course, of the tech, folks, tech leaders who are into this stuff. It's not all of them. Yeah. Tech leaders are a fairly politically diverse bunch. But those who are behind it, I think they have a sense that they're, we're really living in an era of total upward mobility of resources at the very tippy top of the economic ladder. And what's happened is that people in sort of bottom 90%, sort of, middle class, sort of on down, like upper middle class on down, are really struggling. It's harder for people to sort of get a toehold. And you've got families with 2 parents and 4 jobs, and they can't afford a decent life for their kids, or struggling to do so. So they're kind of resentful. And I think sometimes these oligarchs, including some of the tech guys, they sort of they know on some level that the incredible wealth that they have is unjust and is actually not good for America. But they feel really defensive about it. They want to believe that they earned every penny with their own bare hands, right?
Right.
So
instead of through government contracts, when you look at businesses like Palantir and Peter Thiel, and this idea that he can work for the US military and he can do surveillance, and now connected with immigration as well, and yet at the same time theorize about how liberal democracies are a mistake, and actually that there is another way that involves him, and there's a religious connotation to that too. They're all fearing Satan. I mean, it's dark.
I think a lot of those folks are really quite atheistic, but some of them have adopted a quasi-religious identity for strategic purposes.
Wow. It's a lot. It's a lot for the average person to take on, to critically think and discuss about how this threat has presented itself. And I suppose that's why it's so frustrating, because in its simplest form, it's Donald Trump versus the rest of the world. But actually, there are so many bad actors who have taken advantage of Trump and who are riding on his coattails and have their own agendas. The enemy is far from a simple, singular individual. It's really a war on liberalism and a war on modernity, as we've always known it.
That's true, but that's why it's more important than ever to sort of get engaged. I mean, I think one can look at the big picture and feel like it's a bit overwhelming, but, at the end of the day, we have to remember the country didn't go MAGA. I don't think, Trump doesn't have a mandate to destroy democracy. A lot of people voted because they thought he was going to lower the price of eggs, or because they, had a particular view on some of these culture war issues, and they sort of voted for that, but they maybe didn't see the bigger picture. So, the time to start, communicating with people in your sphere about the importance of voting in every election, in the midterms, and voting all the way down the ballot, local elections, all of that really matters, because, we still have, some institutions of democracy that are holding the line. We're seeing a lot of holding the line in a lot of some of the local governance. We're seeing some of the courts holding the line, and I don't think there's any feature of our system as of yet that means that Trump and the MAGA coalition will rule forever, as much as they would like to.
Okay. We have to finish, but I'm very grateful to you for joining us. Katherine Stewart, thanks for being on The Weekend Show.
Thank you so much.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News, or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.